Okay, so what type of adaptation strategies do people have given the changes in their environment? One, they can try to diversify their sources of income in agricultural and fishing areas to new products that are more suitable to the changing environment. They can use migration as a way of reducing this risk. Also, it's possible to have certain members of a family to migrate while the rest stay behind, as to provide some kind of income security while still minimizing the total disruption to the entire family. There are new efforts at trying to provide insurance for vulnerable groups, to provide farmers incentives to put long-term effort into their farms, including putting in irrigation systems. There have been some randomized control trials and development projects that are trying to create insurance systems at a very small scale to those that might otherwise not be able to access insurance systems. You can adapt consumption patterns, but basically if you're earning less money, spend less money is a way to adapt your consumption or change the things you actually buy. Try to stretch your money as far as you can. However, all these consumption patterns that we have, what you buy and what I buy, are embedded into our culture in which we live. I might be more likely to spend scarce resources on buying peanut butter, and you might be more likely to use it to buy Vegemite or something else. That there are these cultural norms about what kind of expenses are expected, and this is another area in which these kind of changes and the scarcity that environmental changes can bring about can affect these cultural changes. The IPCC report basically has not entirely intuitive graph as a way to try to visualize the insecurity and the kind of stresses that people are living with that the video kind of talked about. That it's basically a way to visualize the overlap between conflict, culture, migration, how much and how we live and pay for our livelihoods. So yeah, this is one way to visualize it. There's a bunch of different ways of doing this, but basically the idea is that there are mitigation and adaptation strategies, and these adaptation strategies can be either made at the individual level or through government policy and international effort. The violent conflict, and what we're going to talk about in a second, looks at different ways that states and individuals can try to adapt to be able to prevent violent conflict, and how it overlaps with these kind of risk factors from climate change, and just the kind of short-term or long-term disasters that we've already touched on in this class. Connecting all of this specifically to conflict, we've already discussed in this class the possible direct and indirect mechanisms by which climate change leads to conflict, from Homer-Dixon all the way through a lot of the other specific types of climate factors that might be related to conflict. Most of what we've seen over the course of the semester, and the IPCC report also kind of that links to this, that the links are likely to be indirect, and that as Salayan makes his point in the piece that we read a while back, that it is more likely to be speculative and links that could happen or might happen in the future, rather than demonstrable events that we've seen in the past. And I think with the IPCC, they talk about this in a couple of contexts, that these kind of indirect relationships related to the Darfur conflict, that it's not possible to look at any specific cause as being the most influential. It's the way these things all were present and had various effects that all kind of contribute to the overall increased probability of conflict. And a lot of the resources that individuals and states require to be able to adapt to these kind of challenges are threatened or limited by the decreased amount of resources that climate change can put stress on individual and states' abilities to be able to respond, which makes them more vulnerable. I think what was really interesting in putting together this chapter with the Gleditsch and Nordas chapter, article looking at it in more detail, is that there is costs and benefits at looking at either general trends and all these macro level factors, or looking at specific conflicts in particular. And I think one of the takeaways from Gleditsch and Nordas is that the IPCC defines human security, and we've talked about various aspects of human security and the difficulty in trying to nail down what a definition is, that the IPCC decides to focus not just on physical security, but livelihoods and in economic security. They define it so broad that it can make it harder to look at it from a kind of empirical standpoint. And they look at the effects. If you have a narrow definition of security that involves the lack of violence, it is conceptually clear, but it might miss what we think of when we really talk about human security. So there's costs and benefits in trying to define your area of focus broadly or more narrowly. And there is a definition, there's an incentive of using these kind of definitions similar to conflict that we've already touched on, or terrorism, that definitions can be used as a weapon to threaten someone's calling it human security threat, that any kind of change that people might not like could label it as something related to human security.